how do you get into that mode? I'm guessing you have to understand something about them first. So you have to know what makes them tick. You have to understand what's going to make them suspicious, what's going to trip them up. Are those like generally true, or do you have to tailor them to that specific person?
You come in to any operation against a human being. So human intelligence is called human operations, human intelligence operations. Whenever you come into a human operation, you're using a generalized dossier of the target set. So if I know I'm talking to an Asian person who has traveled to Europe, maybe educated in Europe, their parents are well-to-do, they live in China, but they were born in Cambodia, you can kind of come up with a general sense of the person.
Walk me through that though. So are you thinking, okay, if you're born in Chinese culture, it's more collective in nature. So you probably feel a tremendous sense of pressure from your family. And so how do I leverage that? Or no, you have a certain reaction to authority. And if I can position myself like, are you thinking like that?
You are exactly. That's exactly how you're thinking. So there's a couple things to keep in mind. So first is that there's 3 developmental stages to the human brain. There's 3 developmental stages to the human brain. There's from birth to 7 years old. From birth to 7 years old, we're all sponges. We don't differentiate between true and untrue information. There's just information, right? This is one of the reasons why my son, when he was 4, just fell head over heels in love with his grandpa. His grandpa's wrong pretty much all the time. He just lies. He tells stories that never happened. He just makes stuff up, right? Oh, the reason this is happening is because of that. And I'm like, no, that's not true at all. My 4-year-old son doesn't care. Or when he was 4, he didn't care. But Babu, who he calls his grandpa Babu tells the best stories. So now my son is 10. He has left that first developmental stage. But because of those years spent with his grandfather, he is now predisposed to believe his grandfather. The second developmental stage happens from 7 to 13. In that period of time, you can start to differentiate true and untrue information. But you choose which information you want to give more value to. So you're still absorbing it, you still retain it, but you might have a preference for one bit of information or the other, right? So now this is the place where it's like, yeah, I know I ate broccoli once and it wasn't terrible, but I don't really want to eat it anymore. Before that, you're just like, if you give a 4-year-old broccoli, they'll put it in their mouth. So 7 to 13, people start to have a preference for the information, but they still absorb it all. Puberty, from 13 to 25, nobody thinks about this. Puberty lasts until you are 25 years old.
Damn.
That period of time cognitively is characterized by the fact that you resist some forms of information. So now you actually have the cognitive capacity to hear something and reject it. And not even let it come into your brain at all. So 7 to 13, you hear it, you retain it whether you like it or not. 0 to 7, everything comes in. 13 to 25, you're actually rejecting information. So when we create a dossier on somebody, we're looking at those first 25 years. Where did they spend the first 7 years? Oh, they spent it in China. Lots of stuff we can high probability assume a number of things because they spent the first 7 years in China. Oh, they spent their first 7 years in Alabama. They've spent their first 7 years in New York. They spent their first 7 years in Canada. Lots of stuff you can pull from their foundation of how they were programmed. 7 to 13, they did this. Okay, so they were exposed in some places like Saudi Arabia, North Korea, Turkey, Syria. You can assume that some pieces of information they were just never exposed to. Right? They were predominantly exposed to one style of information. And if they were given other information, they may have absorbed, or they would have absorbed it, but the chances are they were never exposed to it. And then you look at them from their puberty years, 13 to 25. Where were they? What were they doing? What college did they go to? What high school did they go to? What countries were they in? Because now you know, well, what would they have been exposed to? What would they have rejected based on their predisposition to these other formative years? And now you're talking to them in their 35 or 45. After 25, neuroplasticity is still a thing for the entirety of your life, meaning your brain can always learn something new. But your worldview has been set by 25. So unless something comes in and challenges your worldview, and you give it permission to challenge your worldview, you're never going to change the way you think after the age of 25. So we can largely assume that every person that we're talking to, especially at their government, engineer, super secret squirrel stuff, they probably haven't been challenging their worldview since the time that they were 25. So now we have these different levels that we can use to make probabilistic assumptions about how they think and what they believe. When you have that dossier, that generalized dossier, then you can go into a more granular dossier about what they drink, what they eat, who they hang out with, are they cheating on their spouse, how often do they use their phone, all the really nitty-gritty detail stuff to create a picture of how you want to talk to this person. So that your first introductory line essentially predisposes them to want to talk to you for the entire conversation.